The best Christmas gift would be if you just disappeared forever. I heard those words from my own son. Not from a stranger, not from an enemy, but from the child I once carried under my heart, the boy whose fever I watched through sleepless nights, the man I thought would always stand beside me. His voice was flat, almost casual, as though he were commenting on the weather. He glanced at his wife, and she gave a small, satisfied nod. "You said it, not me," she added, her smile cutting deeper than any shout could have. The silence after was unbearable. No plates rattled, no clock ticked loud enough to break it. I felt the air press against my chest, as though the very walls that once sheltered me had closed in, turning my place at the table into a cell. How could they do this to me? If you want to know how I reached this moment, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and stay with me. Because now I'll tell you everything that was hidden behind those words. My name is Helen Parker. That is the name you would find on my nursing license, though few people ever looked at it closely. For 27 years, I worked as a nurse in a small regional hospital, serving shifts that often stretched into nights and holidays. The sound of ventilators, the soft beep of heart monitors, and the low hum of fluorescent lights became the background music of my life. I did it not only because I loved helping people, but because our family needed the money. My husband, Robert, was not always steady with his work. He tried, yes, but he carried debts like heavy stones tied around his ankles, and time and again, I was the one who kept us afloat. I do not regret it. When I think back on those years, I remember tucking bills into envelopes late at night, carefully noting due dates on a wall calendar. I remember boiling pasta at 2 in the morning when Ethan, my son, was still studying for exams. I remember ironing shirts until my hands ached, so that Robert could at least walk into the bank or the office looking presentable. I thought that was what families did. We carried one another, and sometimes the load was uneven, but love made it worthwhile. Robert died 8 years ago. A quiet morning, a heart that simply stopped. I was the one who found him, sitting in his chair by the window. The newspaper was folded on his lap. I remember the way the sunlight touched his shoulder, as if it wanted to hold him in place, but time does not hold anyone. After the funeral, I faced not only grief but also decisions. The house we had lived in for 32 years felt suddenly too large, too empty. I sold it. From the sale, and from the savings I had managed to collect in all those careful years, I gave Ethan and his wife Megan $100,000. Enough for a down payment on their new home. At the time, it felt like the natural thing to do. A mother helping her son start his own life. I wanted him to have security, the kind I never felt we had. Megan smiled then, called me generous, hugged me tightly. Ethan said little, but his eyes softened, and I thought gratitude was there, even if unspoken. I told myself that this was what Robert would have wanted. What I did not realize was that generosity, when repeated too often, can turn into expectation. It is one thing to give once, from the heart. It is another to become the silent purse that everyone assumes will always open. After that first large gift, smaller requests began to arrive, almost unnoticed. The roof needs repair. The car broke down. We're short this month because Megan's hours were cut. Each time, I transferred money. Not always large amounts, but enough to make a difference for them. And with each transfer, a shift happened. Their words grew shorter. Their tone changed. Instead of gratitude, there was assumption. If I hesitated, Ethan would say, "Mom, you still have money sitting in your account anyway." The first time he said that, it struck me strangely. I even laughed lightly because I thought he was joking. But when I looked at his face, I saw no humor there. They became used to my presence in a different way too. When I moved in with them for a time after selling the house, before deciding on the next step, I thought I was being helpful. I cooked. I cleaned. I took care of the little things, like refilling the sugar jar or folding laundry while Megan was at work. But slowly, they began to treat my presence as a nuisance rather than a gift. "Don't move the furniture. This isn't your house. Don't invite guests. It's inconvenient for us. You're always around. It's exhausting." The words were small, sharp pebbles. Each on its own was nothing, but together they filled my shoes until every step hurt. Still, I kept walking, telling myself that families sometimes speak without thinking, that perhaps I was too sensitive. I tried to ignore the tone in Ethan's voice, the glance Megan gave when I entered the room. I told myself it was only a phase. Yet deep inside, I began to feel something shift. A bitterness I had never known. I had given them so much money, time, silence, and in return, I was shrinking in my own life. I could not even place a vase of flowers without feeling I was intruding. Looking back, I see the pattern clearly. At the time, I only felt the weight of it, like the heaviness of humidity before a storm. And I realize now, pride and bitterness often grow from the same soil. My pride in having been the strong one, the giver, slowly turned bitter when I saw how invisible that strength had become to them. That is who I am, and that is who they are. A mother who spent her life holding the fabric of family together, and a son and daughter-in-law who grew so accustomed to it that they could no longer see it. They did not become cruel all at once. It was the slow erosion, the steady drip of disregard, that brought us to the day when Ethan's words cut through me like a knife. And so, when I tell you what happened next, understand, it was not a sudden explosion. It was the natural result of years of imbalance, of me carrying too much, and them forgetting that I too had weight, and feelings, and limits. The memory comes back to me often now, though at the time I dismissed it with a forced smile. It was last summer, a day when the sun pressed heavily on the roof tiles, and the air conditioner rattled like an old man catching his breath. Ethan had called me into the kitchen, his voice flat, almost careless. "Mom, the contractor sent the estimate. It's more than we thought. The repairs can't wait. Can you cover it?" I remember wiping my hands on a dish towel before answering. The smell of roasted chicken still lingered in the air. I asked him how much. He gave me the number as though he were reciting a grocery list. Not a word of hesitation. Not a hint of shame. I nodded, went to my room, opened my laptop, and transferred the money. It was not a small sum. When I came back, I thought at least he would meet my eyes, maybe say thank you. Instead, he muttered, "You still have money sitting in your account anyway." Just like that. I stood still for a moment, the towel clenched in my hand. I waited for him to realize how it sounded, to take it back, to soften it with even a small acknowledgement. But he didn't. He was already scrolling on his phone, his face lit by the screen, my presence shrinking into the background like furniture. At the time, I swallowed it down. I told myself he was tired, distracted. I even smiled as though I hadn't heard the sting in his words. But the truth is, that was the first warning sign. A crack too thin to notice from afar, but once you stand close enough, you see how deep it runs. That night I lay awake, the hum of the refrigerator carrying through the walls, my phone glowing on the nightstand. I scrolled through my bank app, watching the numbers shift down, remembering the long nights in the hospital when I had earned each of those dollars. The swollen feet after 12-hour shifts. The meals skipped. The hours of charting under harsh fluorescent lights. Those numbers were not just digits. They were years of my life. And yet, in Ethan's eyes, they were simply sitting there, waiting to be claimed. The next morning, Megan set a cup of coffee in front of me. The mug was one of mine, a faded blue ceramic with a small chip at the rim. I had brought it from my old house, a familiar weight in my hand. She didn't look at me when she said, "The repairs will add value to the property in the long run." I sipped the coffee, bitter without sugar, and nodded. I understood what she meant. My contribution was not a gift, it was an investment, but not for me. For them. That was the beginning of my unease. A quiet anxiety, hard to name, but impossible to ignore. I began noticing little things. The way Ethan avoided direct gratitude. The way Megan's tone shifted when she spoke about the house, her house, their house, never ours. The way conversations ended quickly when I entered the room. I tried to tell myself it was only adjustment. Families go through phases. Living under one roof is never easy. But in my heart, I felt the distance widening. I began carrying my phone with me everywhere, checking my bank app like a nervous tick. I counted receipts. I reread statements. I told myself I was being careful, but really, I was searching for proof that I wasn't losing ground. That summer, I also found myself spending more time in my small room, the one they had given me at the back of the house. The wallpaper was peeling slightly, and the window stuck whenever I tried to open it, but it was mine. I kept a lavender candle on the dresser, lighting it at night just to remind myself of calm. The scent carried me back to evenings in my old garden, when Robert was still alive and Ethan still smiled at me like a boy. I clung to those small rituals, the chipped blue mug, the lavender candle, as if they were lifelines. They reminded me that I was still someone, still present, even as I felt myself fading in their eyes. The first crack is always quiet. That sentence, "you still have money sitting in your account anyway," has echoed in my head more times than I can count. It was not the largest betrayal, but it was the moment I first understood. My son no longer saw me as a person who had given, sacrificed, and loved. He saw me as a resource, a balance sheet, an account to be drawn from. And though I pushed that thought aside at the time, telling myself not to be dramatic, deep down I knew, once a crack appears, the wall will never be the same again. After that summer, the distance between us no longer felt invisible. It grew month by month, like frost creeping slowly across a window pane. At first it was subtle, a chill in the air that only I seemed to notice. Then it became impossible to ignore. The house itself changed for me. When I first moved in, I treated every room as if I were walking on eggshells. I thought my caution would be temporary, that soon we would find a rhythm, a shared understanding of space. Instead, the restrictions multiplied. One evening, I tried to move the armchair closer to the window in the living room so I could sit with better light while I read. Ethan appeared almost instantly, his voice sharp. "Don't move the furniture, Mom. This isn't your house." The words stung more than the tone. I froze, my hand still resting on the armrest. He walked away as if he had said nothing unusual. I stood there a moment longer, then quietly pushed the chair back into its place. Another time I mentioned inviting an old friend for tea. Megan's face tightened. She stirred her coffee and said, "Don't invite guests, it's inconvenient for us." I wanted to protest. It would only be one afternoon, one pot of tea, one conversation that might remind me who I used to be. But I didn't. I swallowed my words like medicine too bitter to admit was necessary. And then, one evening, after dinner, Megan spoke again, this time without even looking at me. "You're always around, Helen. It's exhausting." She laughed lightly after, as if it were a joke, but I heard no laughter in it. These small dismissals began stacking on top of each other. None of them loud enough to cause a scene. None of them cruel enough to justify shouting back. But each one carved a little deeper into me. I felt like a guest in the very home I had bought for them, a shadow slipping through the hallways, careful not to leave a trace. I still tried to be useful. I folded laundry when no one was watching. I washed dishes before anyone asked. I mended a tear in Ethan's jacket and placed it quietly back in his closet. But instead of gratitude, my efforts seemed to irritate them. Megan once said, "You don't have to touch everything, Helen. Just leave things how they are." So I learned to retreat. I spent more hours in my room, the lavender candle burning lower each night. The chipped blue mug became my companion. I carried it to the kitchen, filled it with tea, then returned to my room like a visitor walking back to her quarters. The rest of the house no longer belonged to me. Anxiety settled into my chest like a permanent tenant. I began second-guessing every move. Should I leave the light on in the hallway? Should I use the good plates? Should I even sit in the living room when they were there? I measured my existence in small hesitations, each one shrinking me a little more. Yet, even as the tension grew, I clung to the hope that this was temporary. Families argue. Families adjust. Perhaps once they saw how much I respected their space, they would soften. I reminded myself that Ethan had once been a gentle boy, the kind who left wildflowers on my nightstand. Surely that boy was still there, beneath the hardness. But hope became harder to maintain. Conversations grew shorter. Invitations dwindled. Holidays, once filled with laughter and chaos, now felt like formal obligations. I sat at the table and listened more than I spoke, afraid that anything I said might be met with another quiet dismissal. The house, which had once symbolized security, now felt like a stage where I was the unwanted extra. My presence was tolerated, not cherished. and the silence that followed their remarks was heavier than words could ever be. I began to realize something painful. Love can survive conflict, even loud arguments. What it cannot survive is neglect. It cannot survive the quiet erosion of respect. And that was what I was living through, the slow, steady dissolving of my place in their lives. It is difficult to explain how deeply those small moments cut. A stranger could have said the same words and I might have brushed them off. But when they come from your own son, from the woman he chose as his partner, the wound is different. It is not a sharp stab. It is a constant pressure, a stone pressing into the same spot over and over until the skin gives way. Looking back, those months feel like a test. Not a test of patience, but a test of how invisible I could become before disappearing altogether. Each time I chose silence over protest, each time I shrank instead of standing tall, I lost a little more of myself. The tension built quietly, steadily. And though I didn't yet know it, all those moments were preparing me for the larger blow that was waiting just ahead, the one that would strip away any illusion I still held about who Ethan and Megan had become, and about where I truly stood in their lives. The moment came not with shouting, not with slammed doors, but with the quiet glow of numbers on a screen. It was late November, and the air outside carried the sharp edge of winter. I sat in my room with the lavender candle burning low, its wax pulled around the wick, when I opened my bank app to check a transfer I had made earlier that week. What I saw stopped me cold. The balance was lower than it should have been. Much lower. My eyes flicked to the transaction history, scrolling line by line until I found it. A withdrawal of $12,400. The label beside it read, "Charitable donation." At first, I thought it must be an error. I reread the number 3 times. 12,000, gone in one motion. My heart pounded as I pressed into the details, the transaction tied to the joint account I had once set up to help Ethan manage payments. I had left my name there for convenience, never thinking it could be turned against me. Charitable donation. The phrase sat heavy in my chest. I knew Ethan and Megan had not given to charity in that way. My son had mentioned a project once, his voice low, almost secretive, something about investing in a new kind of currency, a digital venture he was certain would change everything. At the time, I had nodded politely, not understanding and not pressing. Now I saw the truth. That donation was no gift to the needy. It was a gamble made with my savings. The proof was there in black and white. Numbers do not lie. I closed the app, then opened it again, as though the screen might change. But the digits remained stubborn, empty. 12,000 gone. Not a small mistake. Not an oversight. A deliberate act. I sat back in my chair, the chipped blue mug still warm in my hands. My tea had gone cold, but I hadn't noticed. All I could think of was the years behind those numbers. The nights of double shifts, the holidays spent at the hospital, the meals I skipped so the children could eat better. That money was not sitting there. It was carved out of my life, piece by piece. And now it was being siphoned away under false names. Later that evening, I heard Ethan and Megan talking in the kitchen. Their voices carried down the hall. "Did it go through?" Megan asked. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "It's in. We'll see returns soon, just wait." She laughed lightly, a sound that twisted my stomach. "Your mom won't even notice. She never looks at that account." The words struck harder than any slap. She thought I wouldn't notice. He thought I wouldn't care. And together they had decided that what was mine was theirs to use. I wanted to walk into that kitchen, to hold my phone in front of them, to demand an explanation. But I stayed in my room frozen. My silence was not weakness, though it felt like it. It was shock. The kind of shock that makes every sound too loud, every breath too heavy. That night, sleep would not come. I stared at the ceiling, the faint crack in the plaster like a scar running above me. My mind replayed every moment. Ethan's careless words about money sitting in my account, Megan's dismissal of my presence, the slow erosion of respect that had led to this. All the signs had been there. I had simply chosen not to see them. By morning, my body ached from stillness. I rose, dressed, and held my phone again. The transaction glowed back at me, undeniable. The betrayal was not abstract anymore. It had a date, a time, a dollar amount. It was written down like scripture. For the first time, I allowed myself to name what I was feeling. Not just sadness. Not just disappointment. Betrayal. My own son had stolen from me. Quietly, deliberately, with the confidence that I would never confront him. I sat at the edge of my bed, the old suitcase resting against the wall beside me. Its leather handle was worn smooth, the lock stiff from years untouched. I reached for it without thinking, pulled it closer, and brushed away the thin layer of dust. Inside, beneath folded linens and a stack of old photographs, lay a sealed envelope marked in Robert's handwriting, Plan B. I had forgotten it was there. Or perhaps I had tried to forget. My hands shook as I slid the envelope free, the paper brittle under my fingers. I opened it carefully and found documents inside, deeds, records, proof that despite everything, I was still listed as co-owner of this house. Robert had thought ahead. He had left me a quiet safeguard, one I had never needed until now. Holding those papers, I felt the weight shift inside me. The fear that had settled in my chest for months began to crack. In its place came something else, not anger, not yet, but clarity. Cold, steady clarity. I closed the envelope and set it back into the suitcase, locking it with one firm motion. My hands no longer trembled. I knew then that this would not continue. The betrayal had revealed itself fully. And in that moment, I stopped being only a mother clinging to hope. I became a woman ready to act. The morning after I discovered the withdrawal, I woke before the sun. The house was silent, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. I sat on the edge of the bed, the old suitcase still leaning against the wall, the envelope marked Plan B resting on top. My fingers brushed over Robert's handwriting again. The ink had faded, but his letters were strong, steady. For the first time in months, I felt steady too. I brewed tea in the kitchen, the chipped blue mug warming my hands. Through the window, I watched frost lace the grass, each blade outlined in silver. The world outside looked fragile, but also beautiful, untouched by the betrayals that lived under this roof. I carried the mug back to my room, placed it carefully beside the candle, and opened the envelope again. The documents confirmed what I had already glimpsed. My name remained on the deed. Despite selling my old house, despite transferring money, despite every compromise, I had not given everything away. Robert had seen to that. He had known, in his quiet, cautious way, that one day I might need protection. I thought about him then, about the way he used to plan for things I never considered. He kept extra flashlights in the garage, batteries tucked in drawers, canned food lined neatly on shelves. "You never know," he would say, half smiling. He must have known, too, that people can change, that security is not only about walls and roofs, but about choices and boundaries. I closed my eyes and whispered to him in the stillness, as if he could hear me, "Thank you." The clarity grew sharper by the hour. I could no longer pretend that Ethan's words and Megan's glances were just careless slips. I could no longer excuse the drained account as a misunderstanding. The truth was simple. They had taken advantage of me because I had allowed it. Not knowingly, not willingly, but through silence. Each time I swallowed my hurt, I gave them permission. Each time I told myself it was easier not to argue, I carved away another piece of myself. That realization was bitter, but it was also freeing. If my silence had built this cage, then my voice, my decisions, could open the door. I sat with the suitcase open beside me, the documents spread across the bed. The paper smelled faintly of dust, old wood, and time itself. I touched each page, steadying myself with their weight. They were not just papers. They were proof that I was not powerless. I remembered the sound of Ethan's voice in the kitchen the night before. "She won't even notice." Those words rang louder than any argument. He truly believed I would remain blind. That was his mistake. I noticed. I always noticed. My heart did not race anymore. The panic that had gripped me when I first saw the missing money was gone. In its place came something colder, quieter. A calm resolve. That day I did not confront them. I did not storm into the kitchen or demand explanations. Instead, I folded the documents neatly back into the envelope, placed it inside the suitcase, and closed it with one deliberate motion. The click of the lock echoed in the room, final and firm. I went about the day as if nothing had changed. I prepared a small lunch, washed a few dishes, and kept to myself. But inside, everything had changed. I no longer felt like a guest in their house. I was the co-owner, the one who had made this life possible. And I was ready to reclaim my part. That evening, when Ethan asked casually if I could cover another expense, just this once, I met his eyes fully. I did not raise my voice, I did not argue. I simply said, "Not this time." The silence that followed was heavy. He blinked, surprised, then shrugged and walked away. But I saw it, the first flicker of uncertainty in his face. In my room, I lit the lavender candle again and watched the flame steady itself after a small tremble. I felt the same inside. Shaken, yes, but upright. I realized I had been waiting all these years for someone else to protect me, to thank me, to see me. Robert had done that while he lived, but Ethan and Megan never would. If I wanted dignity, I would have to claim it myself. The clarity was cold, but it was also pure. I understood now I was not disappearing. I was preparing. The years of sacrifice had shaped me into someone strong, someone capable. And now that strength would no longer be used to carry others who refused to respect it. That night, as I closed my eyes, I felt no panic. Only resolve. At dawn I opened the suitcase again, set the Plan B envelope on the bed, and laid out each page like pieces on a quiet chessboard. The fear that used to flutter in my chest did not arrive. I felt only the slow strength that comes when you finally step onto solid ground. I brewed tea, held my chipped blue mug, and dialed Susan. She had been our family lawyer since Robert and I were young enough to think wills were for other people. She answered at once. "Helen." "I'm ready," I said. "I want to file an official notice to sell my share of the house and to remove Ethan's access to my accounts." There was a brief pause. "Come by at 10, she said. "Bring identification, the deed, and any banking records." I arrived early. The waiting room smelled of paper and lemon cleaner. A clock ticked calmly. When Susan ushered me in, she studied my face the way a nurse studies a monitor. "Tell me what changed," she said. I slid the bank statements across her desk. The line marked charitable donations sat there like a bruise. "He moved $12,400. Without my consent." Susan nodded once. "We'll freeze the joint account today. You're co-owner of the property." I placed the deed on the desk. "Yes. Then we'll record a notice of intent to sell," she said, already typing. "It forces a conversation with a deadline." I watched her type. Relief collected in me like rain in a clean bucket. Not triumph, just order returning. She printed forms, explained each line, and passed me a pen. My signature came out even. "When we finished," she said, "the letter to Ethan and Megan goes out today by courier. Utilities in arrears." "Several," I said. "We'll notify providers that any extensions require your written approval. No more silent obligations." By noon I walked out with copies in a manila folder. The weight of that folder was different from the weights I had carried all year. This one lifted me. On the way home I stopped at the bank. The manager, a woman with silver hair and a careful smile, reviewed the file and confirmed the freeze. She removed Ethan's digital access while I watched the screen. A quiet click, and the door he'd left open was closed. At home, I brewed another tea and placed the folder on the kitchen table. Afternoon light fell across it. When Ethan came in, he glanced at the envelope with the courier's emblem. "What's this?" "From my attorney," I said. "You'll want to read it." He frowned, tore it open, then looked at me as if a stranger had taken my place. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said. "The account is frozen. Any sale discussions will go through counsel. From now on, we'll use calendars, not promises." Megan read over his shoulder, color draining from her face. "Helen, this is extreme." "It's necessary," I said. "I won't be dismissed in a house I helped pay for, and I won't fund projects I never agreed to." Ethan's jaw tightened. "We were going to pay it back." "You withdrew it under charity," I replied. "That wasn't an error. That was a choice." No one shouted. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the vent a little heat cracked. I carried the folder to my room and locked the suitcase. On my phone, I set new passwords, enabled alerts, and scheduled one final month of utilities, documented, traceable, finite. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, candle unlit, feeling the air change. Boundaries make a different kind of silence. It doesn't crush. It clears. I texted Susan, notices delivered. She replied, proud of you. Rest. I did not rest exactly, but I breathed fully for the first time in a long while. The next moves would be practical appraisals, dates, signatures. I was not afraid of any of it. Procedure is mercy when love has failed to protect you. That evening, when Ethan knocked, I answered. He stood there with eyes I recognized from years ago and a voice I didn't. Mom, he said, can we talk? We can, I said. With respect. And with the lights on. Christmas Eve arrived with a brittle sky. I spent the morning quietly, making tea and leaving the kitchen orderly, the way I once left a patient's room at shift change. By afternoon, Megan set out platters, the kind she posts online with neat labels and clustered candles. Ethan paced, checking his phone. It'll be a small thing, he told someone. Just family. At 5:08, the house sighed and went dark. The refrigerator stopped mid-hum. The furnace fell silent. The string lights along the banister died at once. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Megan's voice cut the dark. Ethan? What did you do? He rattled drawers for a flashlight, found none that worked. I stood still, letting my eyes adjust. Emergency training never leaves you. You listen first. Outside, the neighborhood glowed. Only our house was a square of absence. Megan's phone lit her face an unkind blue. The power company says the account is past due, she said. Final extension expired last week. She turned to me. Helen, did you? I paid through the end of the month, I said. Documented. After that, any extension requires my authorization. The notice explained everything. Ethan was swiping and cursing softly. The joint account isn't letting me in. It's frozen, I said. He stared as though a stranger had answered. On Christmas. On the first day after enough was enough. Megan began texting guests. Bubbles of apology stacked under her thumb. Replies arrived. Sorry, we'll reschedule. Hope everything's okay. She kept saying, it's a glitch, but the word rang hollow without light. At 5:32, the doorbell failed because the doorbell was electric. Their first guests messaged from the driveway. We're going to head home, the text read. Roads are icy. A second couple canceled. The cousin with the loud laugh sent a snowman emoji and a promise for next time. Ethan called the power company and waited on hold while the carols looped. When someone finally answered, he spoke in a voice I hadn't heard since he was a boy asking for help. The representative explained the balance, the late fees, the need for the account holder's consent. He glanced at me. I can authorize payment for tonight only, I said. But the pattern ends here. He nodded and did not argue. He handed me the phone. I gave my name, approved a one-time payment from my separate account, and scheduled the rest as pending with conditions. By 6:15, light returned in pieces, the hallway first, then the furnace, then the tree. Megan relit the candles, hands shaking. People are coming, she asked. No, Ethan said, staring at the lawyer's envelope on the counter. The courier had delivered it that afternoon. He opened it, lips moving as he read. Notice of intent to sell. 30 days to initiate mediation. Utilities to be handled with written approval. His voice thinned. You can't be serious. I am, I said, steady. He looked at the tree. We had plans. So did I answered. Mine include boundaries. A message pinged. The caterer couldn't complete delivery. Their system had flagged the card as declined after the freeze. Megan whispered, this is humiliating. She deleted her draft without posting. Later, when the guests were officially no one, we sat with plates we did not need. The food tasted like salt. Ethan rubbed his temples and said, I made a mistake. He said it like a fact, not an apology. I know, I replied. The letters aren't punishment. They're clarity. The night ended early. No singing, no toasts. Only receipts printed, form signed, a calendar invite for mediation set for January 3rd at 10 a.m. As he typed it, Ethan said, I'll be there. I expect you will, I said. Bring your records. When I switched off the tree, the room settled into a clean, honest dimness. Consequences had come, not loud, not cruel, simply on time. And for once, I did not carry them for anyone else. Image cracked. I left the house on a clear morning, the sky the pale blue of the ceramic chip on my mug. I packed only what mattered: the suitcase, the manila folder, the lavender candle wrapped in a dish towel. I locked my room, set the key on the dresser, and walked out without checking if anyone watched me go. My steps sounded different in the hallway, lighter, as if the floor had waited for me to choose myself. Charleston met me with salt air and gulls that argued above the rooftops. I signed a month-to-month lease for a small apartment above a cafe on East Bay. The landlord slid 2 keys across the table and said, "Peace comes standard with the view." I believed her when the harbor air moved through the open window. The apartment was one large room with a narrow galley kitchen and a window that framed a sliver of water. When I set the suitcase on the floor, the wheels made a soft click that sounded like a period at the end of a long sentence. I lit the lavender candle and brewed tea. Steam brushed my face, gentle and unquestioning. For the first time in years, I ate exactly what I wanted: toast with honey, an apple cut into even wedges, tea sweetened until it tasted like my childhood. I put my phone on the counter and turned off notifications, leaving only calls from Susan. A stillness settled over the room. Not the silence of being unwelcome, but the quiet of belonging to oneself. I bought a secondhand table for $40 from a shop that smelled like cedar and dust. I carried it up the stairs myself, one slow flight at a time, and set it by the window. On it I placed the blue mug, the manila folder, and a small vase of grocery store daisies. The daisies opened the next morning, bright and immodest. I let them. On my first evening, I walked to the water with my hands in my pockets. The wind lifted the corners of my scarf. A couple argued near the pier, then laughed, then held hands. Life continued everywhere, without asking for permission. I felt my ribs loosen as if the ocean had unfastened them. The next day I called the hospital in town and asked about volunteer shifts. 3 mornings a week, the coordinator offered. Front desk, greet families, guide them to the elevators. Quiet work. I smiled. Quiet work fits me. I set a start date for January 8th, the Monday after our mediation, a line on my calendar that looked like a promise made to myself. I made other small arrangements. I opened a new checking account and linked it to none of the old ones. I set alerts that chimed like soft bells when a payment posted. I wrote my budget on a single sheet: rent, utilities, groceries, bus pass, a modest line for books and flowers. Numbers can be kind when they are yours. At night I read by the window. The cafe below closed at 9. Afterward the street settled into quiet, broken by a late bicycle or a distant horn. I kept the candle burning until the wax made a shallow lake. Sometimes I spoke aloud to Robert. "You were right about batteries," I said once, smiling at the flashlight in the drawer. "And about people." On the 3rd morning, I sent Susan a note: "I'm safe and settled." "Thank you." She replied with a thumbs up and a meeting reminder for January 3rd at 10 a.m. I added, "My mailing address has changed," and typed the new one carefully. The small act of claiming an address felt ceremonial, as if I had signed my name to the surface of the world. Ethan texted once, "Where are you?" I read it and put the phone face down. A minute later came another, "We can fix this." I answered hours later, "Mediation is scheduled. Bring your records." He sent back a single period. I let the conversation end there, merciful and exact. I began building a life that answered to daylight. I walked the Battery before breakfast. I learned the names of the baristas: Maya with the constellation tattoo, Luis who hummed while tamping espresso. I tipped in cash, folded once, placing gratitude exactly where it belonged. I bought a small journal and wrote 3 lines each night: one truth, one boundary, one hope. Truth: I am not a wallet with a heartbeat. Boundary: I don't explain the cost of my peace. Hope: to keep this window open. I slept better. When I woke in the dark, I no longer counted transactions. I counted breaths, the simplest currency. The harbor wind moved the curtains just enough to prove the world was still moving with me. I kept the suitcase under the bed, not from fear, but because readiness is a kindness I give myself. On Sundays, I lit a candle for people I had cared for at the hospital and at home. I thought of Ethan as a child with wildflowers clutched in a wet fist. I thought of Megan on good days when she laughed without calculation. I did not rehearse speeches or victories. Justice does not need an audience. It needs a ledger and peace to read it by. This is what freedom felt like, not triumph, not noise, but the unremarkable miracle of making tea in a room that is yours and tasting only tea. I still remember Ethan's words, "The best Christmas gift would be if you just disappeared forever." For a long time they echoed in me, sharp and merciless. But now, sitting by my own window in Charleston with a chipped blue mug and a lavender candle, I hear them differently. I did not disappear. I appeared for myself. They lost me not because I ran away, but because they treated my presence as a burden instead of a gift. Families are not guaranteed. Without respect, love becomes only dependency. I will not live like that again. I volunteer now, greet strangers with kindness, and keep promises to myself. My life is quieter, smaller, but it is mine. Dignity doesn't require applause, only courage lived day by day. If this touched a nerve, you belong here. Subscribe to hear truths where silence becomes strength. Because in the end, the greatest gift is not gratitude from others. It is the freedom of self-respect.